Good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning, whenever you're listening to this, my lovely students. Boy, you talk about an important issue. I love talking about China. I love talking about India. But man, this one hits home. Islam, baby. And if you go to Europe by chance, this is even more intense over there, closer to the Middle East. Europe has large Islamic minorities. And their arrival on the European continent has created a lot of tension. If you talk to some German students, they'll tell you about that. If you talk to some English or French students, they'll tell you about that. So this is an incredibly important topic. And based on your podcast, a lot of Americans have some pretty intense views of Islam. And so we need to know more about this fascinating topic. And I think for many Americans, it creates fear. When we see a woman that's wearing a burqa like these young ladies, or we see a Middle Eastern man, we might feel some fear, some anxiety about that. But for many people in the world, Islam is this part of their being. It's their reason for living. And I kind of like this image right here. Islam, love. That's what it means to a lot of people. So we need to understand this faith. Okay, two essential questions in this presentation. Number one, who was Muhammad? And number two, what is Islam? We're going to deal with him, and we're going to deal with the subject on a macro level this morning, this afternoon, or this evening, whenever you're listening. Okay, here we go, people. Now, basic question is, where do Muslims live? Now, I like this map here. It shows you percentage of the population which is Muslim, and they have the United States at 7 to 15, which is way too high. I don't think there's even 5% of Americans who are Muslim, so I disagree with that. But I don't disagree with this. Look across North Africa, look in the Middle East, Western Asia, and also down here in Southeast Asia. That's where a majority of people who live in those countries are Muslims. This country does not do it justice. Look, it has the same percentage-wise as, I think it's 7 to 15 or something like that. Guess what? India is so large that 7 to 15% makes it, I think, like the third or fourth, or maybe even the second largest Islamic country in the world. We'll check that in just a moment. But yes, Islam is focused primarily in these areas. You can see some enclaves in southeastern Europe as well. All right, now, this is what a lot of people don't understand. Only 3 of the top 10 Islamic nations are Arab. So that begs the question, what exactly constitutes an Arab? All an Arab is that your native language is Arabic. That's all that means. So if you go back to that map right here, people who live in Morocco, they're Arabs. People who live in Algeria are Arabs. People who live in Tunisia are Arabs. Libya are Arabs. Egypt are Arabs. Saudi Arabia are Arabs. Yemen, Oman, these people are Arabs. Iraq, Syria, these people are Arabs. But guess what? People who live in Turkey are not Arabs. And don't you dare call them Arabs. They're Turks. People who live in Iran are not Arabs, they're Persians. And so just because they're in the same area does not mean they're all Arabs. All Arab means is that you speak Arabic, that's your native language. And if you look at these countries, Indonesia, which is right down here, it's a huge country. I think it's the 4th largest nation in the world population-wise. That's the largest Islamic country in the world, clear down here, away from the Middle East. Pakistan and India, Bangladesh. The first Arab country is Egypt. Then look, Nigeria, the largest African country, is in 6th place. Iran, non-Arab. Turkey, non-Arab. So out of this list, Egypt, Algeria, and Morocco are the only Arab nations. So it's wrong for Westerners to think that most Muslims are Arab. Now, most Arabs are Muslims, but Arabs do not constitute that much of the population, and the primary reason is because where they are the dominant population, it's a very dry region, so they're sparsely populated. Okay, this is a wonderful image right here. This is, right here, Muhammad. This right here is the angel Gabriel, and rarely do you see humans depicted in Islamic art, but this is an exception. I have to talk about this guy called Muhammad, who is, wow, without doubt, one of the most important people ever to have lived. This is an important statistic. 20% of the current world population is Muslim. 33% of the current world population is Christian. Christianity has more than anybody else, but Islam is in second place. And Islam is gaining on Christianity. So this is a very significant figure. I don't think that many people in the United States realize how few Christians there are in the world percentage-wise. Okay, now let's talk about Muhammad. Muhammad was born in Arabia around 570 CE. Now his job was that of a caravan leader. If you think about the geography of the Arabian Peninsula, there's vast stretches of desert. And you have to transport products across these vast stretches of desert. And a caravan leader, that's what he does. So caravans were like naval convoys. Now just like naval convoys, when a caravan would reach a town, the members of the caravan would go on shore leave. And one of the towns that they went to was a place called Mecca. So when these guys would hit Mecca, baby, it was party time. Now, Muhammad was one of these characters that was really troubled by that. He was a very pious man. He actually has this vision that I'm going to talk about in his 40s. He was 40 years old when he went through this transformation process. But he was a very pious man before that. And you might be able to relate to this. Say like you have some friends who just love to party, man, and you're not like that. And they're always trying to get you to go out and drink and carouse and do whatever, and you're like, I don't want to do that. And it makes you very uncomfortable when they do it, and you just want to get away from them. Well, when Muhammad would lead his caravan into towns like Mecca, his members of his caravan would get out and start carousing and partying, and he would be disgusted by their behavior and go out and isolate himself and meditate. So as the story goes, in 610, when he's 40 years old, he's outside of Mecca and he's meditating while his idiot friends partied up in Mecca. And all of a sudden, he turns and sees the angel Gabriel. And the angel Gabriel says something very specific to him. He said, you better tell your friends that there's such a thing called divine judgment, and they better straighten up or they're going to hell. Now, as you can imagine, Muhammad was taken aback by this, and but he listened. And over the next month, he kept retreating to this cave and kept getting more and more and more revelations. The sum of all these revelations is the Quran. And this time when he has the Quran dictated to him by the angel Gabriel is a celebration in Islam we call Ramadan, which is based on the lunar calendar. That's why it falls during different times of the year. I love this image. This is a traditional Islamic image. You have like you have the calligraphy down here, you have vegetation here, and you have the crescent moon, because Ramadan falls during the lunar calendar, which is really significant. Now, once Muhammad has this revelation, he becomes bound and determined that he's going to straighten out his friends in the city of Mecca, where the Kaaba is, that wonderful building that's a holy shrine to Arabs, even before Islam. So, think of this, guys. You go into Las Vegas, the party central of the United States of America, and you try to outlaw liquor, you try to outlaw gambling, you try to outlaw prostitution, you try to eliminate illegal drugs. Chances are there'd be some members of organized crime that would want you to leave the city and just disappear. That's exactly what happened to Muhammad. He goes sprinting into Mecca, sees his friend, he goes, you, put down that beer. You, stop smoking that hash. You, put down that prostitute. And like, people were like, get out of here. I mean, haven't you had a situation where you had a friend that was ultra religious and tried to convert you, and you were like, nah, I'm not interested, man. And you became very uncomfortable. So that's what happened. Now, he gets booted out of the city by the city fathers, and that's his hometown, Mecca. And he decides that he needs to go north. Now, this is very significant. This is 12 years after he had his initial revelation, so he's in his early 50s now. And he retreats north to a city called Medina, which is spelled exactly like Medina, Ohio. Medina, Ohio is named after Medina. I don't know how many people who live in Medina realize that. And he goes there because he's invited there. The city fathers in Medina had heard about him, were impressed with what he was trying to do. That is a city that was pretty messed up, pretty chaotic. And they said, why don't you come up to Medina and straighten this out? This is exactly what he did. So what he does in Medina is he sets up a model community based entirely on the laws of the Quran. This is what you often hear of called Sharia law. It's a total and complete theocracy. In other words, it would be like in the United States of America, the majority of people who live here are Christians. Christians embrace something called the Ten Commandments. Imagine the Ten Commandments being enforced by the police. Your father might be in trouble on the taking the Lord in vain when the next time he tries to do a home project. Hey, this image I have here of this giant eye, great way to think about Sharia law is the same way to think about the Ten Commandments. It's an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and a soul for a soul. Now, what's interesting about Muhammad is he had so much success up in Medina that Mecca got threatened, and they decided to attack. Now, oftentimes when you hear Islam talked about, you hear about how it was spread by violence, and there's a lot to that. Muhammad gets an army, and he goes back and he conquers Mecca. The year is 630 CE. This is a very significant time in Islamic history. Here's a great image of when that's taking place. So you can see the calligraphy, the Arabic writing down here, and there's the Prophet Muhammad returning in triumph to Mecca. He goes in, immediately cleans out the Kaaba, gets rid of all those idols, and now it is this cube, which represents the most holy place on earth as far as Muslims are concerned. Okay, now, I think most of you have heard about the 5 pillars of Islam, but I want to go into just a little bit more detail about the basics of the faith. And I love this image right here, a belief in Allah. What most Westerners don't get is Allah is another name for the same God that is worshipped by the Jews, the same God that is worshipped by the Christians. They see it as no difference. It's the same God. It's pure monotheism. Belief in angels, like the angel Gabriel, who came to the Prophet Muhammad and dictated the Quran to him, there are these beings, these supernatural beings that work in the universe on behalf of the righteous and opposed to the wicked. Now, this is interesting. Islam is just this basic evolution from Judaism to Christianity to Islam. Most people think of it as something entirely different, which most Muslims would be surprised by. Here are the holy books according to Islamic tradition. The Talmud, the Torah, forgive me, the Torah, the original 5 books of the Old Testament. This shows you the scrolls, the Jewish Torah. Parts of the Old Testament, namely the Psalms and the New Testament. In other words, Muslims absolutely embrace the Christian and Jewish scriptures. And finally, the Quran, which is made up of 114 surahs, or chapters, which we'll learn about later. Now, this part just is so fascinating to Westerners. Here's something that's important to understand about Muhammad. Muhammad is not a god, he's a man. He is merely a prophet. And all the Old Testament and New Testament prophets are embraced by Muslims. And Jesus is embraced by Muslims. Now, you're going to learn some specifics about what Muslims think about Jesus next week. But they don't believe that he was divine. They believe that he was an enlightened prophet only. They don't believe that he was something different. They don't believe that he was God incarnate. They believe that he was an enlightened prophet. But guess what? They have tremendous reverence for him. And it's kind of interesting. Most Christians would ally themselves with Jews. Jews do not have positive feelings toward Jesus. They look at him as blasphemous. Whereas Muslims love Jesus, just love Jesus. And yet Christians and Muslims seem to be at odds. Go figure. Muslims believe in a last day. This is the day that all living souls and everything in the universe shall perish and be judged. Very similar to the book of Revelations. Very similar. They believe in divine decree. In other words, God has a plan for everyone and everything. And the way the world and time unfolds is in accordance with this plan. They believe in resurrection. Now, this is a Christian image. Got it. But it's the same concept. They believe that the resurrection is when all things will come again, will come to life. On this day, they will be called to account for their good deeds and bad deeds. So, Christianity is based primarily on faith. Islam is based on deeds. It is a do the right thing religion. Now, here are the 5 pillars of Islam, which I'm sure you learned about in middle school, but I want to go through them quickly because they are very significant. The first one is faith, and you've heard this. There's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. Merely by saying that, you become a Muslim. Now, Mr. Sturtevant did not become a Muslim by saying that, but if you say it and you mean it in the right spirit, you become a Muslim. You're supposed to pray 5 times a day. Now this is very significant in Islam, and you're going to see this in the movie Malcolm X. It's the thing that he cannot do, but he has to do in order to become a Muslim. Alms. Some of you guys might be Roman Catholics. If you go to a Roman Catholic church, they have something called the tithe, which is 10% of your income is supposed to go to the church. Something very similar in Islam. It's called zakat, or it's almsgiving. And one thing that you have to say about Islam is it is the world's most charitable religion. They're very serious about charity. Once a year, you are to fast during the holy month of Ramadan. Here's what you're not allowed to do. No sexual intercourse with your spouse during daylight hours. No consumption of food during daylight hours. You're allowed to drink water. If you are unhealthy, you're allowed to have food. But otherwise, no loving and no eating during daylight hours. Must be some pretty wild nights during Ramadan. And finally, once in your life, if you are able, you are supposed to go to Mecca. Now, I'm going to tell you something. In the powerful movie Malcolm X, his going to Mecca changes everything. And it's the crux of the movie. So there you go, people. Islam. Can't wait to go further.